They thought it was just another sleepy highway rest area off Interstate 95, a good place to start expanding their territory into the northeast. When the Iron Serpents MC spotted an older man in hiking boots and a faded military cap sitting alone at one of the picnic tables, they figured it would be an easy target for their plans. What they didn't realize was that James "Hawk" Harrison wasn't just another retired Army veteran. He was a former 75th Ranger Regiment commander who'd spent 15 years running high-risk special operations across 3 continents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. His quiet demeanor and watchful gaze masked a tactical mind that had outmaneuvered warlords and dismantled terrorist cells from Afghanistan to Somalia. Now, watching 2 Iron Serpents members swagger across the rest area's concrete pavilion, Harrison recognized the familiar signs of criminals probing for weakness. He could have walked away, could have minded his own business like everyone else who'd watched this gang terrorize rest stops up and down the eastern seaboard. Instead, he chose to make a stand, a decision that would transform a simple highway rest area into ground zero of a war against one of the East Coast's most brutal criminal organizations. By the time the dust settled, the Iron Serpents would learn a harsh lesson about judging a book by its cover, and the entire interstate system would never be the same. This is the story of how 2 bikers picked the wrong veteran to intimidate, and how one man's courage inspired an entire region to take back their highways. Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we've got something special planned that you won't want to miss. The late summer sun beat down on the riverside rest area, casting long shadows across the picnic tables as the afternoon traffic hummed steadily along I-95. Harrison sat at his usual spot, a weathered wooden table with a clear view of both the parking lot and the main building. 22 years of military service had ingrained in him certain habits. Always position yourself with multiple escape routes, always maintain situational awareness, always be prepared. Sarah Chen, the rest area's day manager, approached with a fresh cup of coffee from the small cafe inside. Her presence had been a constant source of friendly conversation during Harrison's regular stops on his travels between consulting jobs. "Your usual, Hawk," she said, setting down the cup. "Still the best coffee between DC and Boston." "Appreciate it, Sarah," he replied, his eyes briefly scanning the newcomers pulling into the lot. "How's Tommy doing with those college applications?" "Finally finished his essays last night. Still nervous about his chances, though." The peaceful afternoon routine shattered as 2 motorcycles roared into the parking lot, their straight pipes deliberately loud enough to make several travelers jump. Harrison didn't look up from his coffee, but his awareness shifted instantly. Through the reflection in his phone screen, he watched 2 men dismount their bikes, both wearing leather cuts adorned with the distinctive Iron Serpents patch, a coiled snake wrapped around a bloody sword. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she took a step back. "Oh no," she whispered. "Those are the ones we were warned about last week. They've been causing trouble up and down I-95. Harrison gave her a reassuring nod. "It's okay, Sarah. Just go about your business like normal." The door to the main building chimed as the bikers entered. The taller one, sporting a shaved head and dark sunglasses, stalked in first. A patch on his cut identified him as Viper. His companion, younger and wiry with flame tattoos creeping up his neck, followed close behind. The rest area was about to become a battlefield, though none of the tired travelers seeking a brief respite from their journeys could have known it. But for Harrison, this was familiar territory. He'd spent his life identifying threats and eliminating them before they could grow. Now, watching the bikers case the rest area like predators sizing up prey, he knew this peaceful afternoon was about to turn into something else entirely. Sometimes the difference between peace and war comes down to being in the right place at the right time. Or in the Iron Serpents case, the wrong one. I'll create part 2, which according to our structure falls under Challenge to Peace, the initial confrontation where the antagonists make their first move, and the protagonist shows the first hints of his capabilities. This section should build tension while revealing more about both sides of the coming conflict. "Well, ain't this cozy?" Viper drawled, his voice carrying an edge that made Several travelers pull their children closer. The rest area's small cafe area fell silent as he and his companion swaggered toward the counter where Maya, the young barista, tried to keep her hand steady. "Real nice setup you got here." Sarah Chen emerged from the back office, her face carefully neutral, though Harrison noticed her right hand sliding beneath the counter, where he knew she kept a taser. "Welcome to Riverside Rest Area. What can I get you, gentlemen?" The younger biker, whose cut identified him as Torch, smirked as he leaned against the counter. "How about everything in the register for starters?" He kept his voice low, but the threat was clear. A family of 4 quickly gathered their belongings and hurried out, the father casting an apologetic glance toward Sarah. Viper placed a heavy hand on Torch's shoulder. "Easy there, brother. We're just here to talk business." He turned to Sarah, his smile never reaching his eyes. "See, this stretch of I-95 is under new management. Iron Serpents are expanding our territory, and we're here to discuss your monthly security fees." Harrison continued sipping his coffee, but his muscles coiled imperceptibly, ready for action. He'd seen this pattern before, both in war zones and after returning home. Small gangs moving into new territory always started with intimidation, establishing fear before revealing their true operations. Sarah's voice remained steady. "This is a state-maintained facility. We don't need any private security." "Everyone needs protection," Viper replied, his tone darkening. "Bad things happen to places that don't understand that. Equipment breaks down, supplies go missing, travelers have accidents." Torch wandered toward a table where an elderly couple was trying to eat their lunch, deliberately bumping their table and spilling their drinks. That's when Harrison spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of command. "The lady said she's not interested." The rest area fell silent. Viper turned slowly, seeming to notice Harrison for the first time. "Well, well." He approached the picnic table where Harrison sat. "Looks like we got ourselves a hero." He loomed over Harrison, trying to use his height for intimidation. "This ain't your business, old-timer." Harrison finally looked up, meeting Viper's gaze. His eyes were steady, showing neither fear nor aggression. "You're making it my business." "That right?" Viper leaned closer. "And just who do you think you are?" "Just a guy trying to enjoy his coffee." Harrison's voice remained level, but something in his tone made Torch pause. "But I've got a pretty good idea who you are. Iron Serpents MC, moving up from Georgia, trying to establish new territory. You start with intimidation at rest stops and tourist areas, then move on to protection rackets, then drugs." Viper's eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses. "You seem to know a lot about it. Enough to tell you you're making a mistake." Harrison hadn't moved, hadn't even tensed up. He simply took another sip of his coffee. Torch moved toward Harrison, his hand drifting toward the back of his belt. "Only mistake being made is by you, old man." Harrison didn't move, didn't even flinch. He simply said, "That hand moves another inch toward that weapon, son, and we'll see how well you do with a broken wrist and dislocated shoulder." Something in Harrison's voice, the absolute certainty in it, made Torch hesitate. Viper studied Harrison more carefully now, noting the military bearing, the way he controlled his space, the precise positioning that didn't seem casual at all. "You threatening us, old-timer?" Viper's voice carried a hint of uncertainty now. "No threat," Harrison corrected him. "Just simple cause and effect. You try what you're thinking about trying, and I'll show you exactly why that's a poor decision." Viper backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact. "Come on, Torch. We'll finish this conversation another time." As they mounted their bikes, Viper pointed 2 fingers at his eyes, then at the rest area, a clear signal they'd be watching. After the roar of motorcycles faded, the tension in the rest area slowly dissipated. Sarah approached Harrison's table. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But they'll be back, won't they?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Yes," Harrison nodded, returning to his coffee. "With more of them next time." He turned to face her. "But we'll be ready." Maya brought him a fresh cup of coffee, her hand still shaking slightly. "What are we going to do?" Harrison looked out at the highway where the bikers had disappeared. "First, we call State Police Lieutenant Jack Rivera. He needs to know the Iron Serpents are moving into his territory." He pulled out his phone. "Then we start preparing, because those two were just scouts. The real trouble hasn't even begun." As the afternoon sun began to set, Harrison remained at his table planning his next moves. He knew the Iron Serpents would return, probably the next day with reinforcements. They couldn't afford to let his challenge go unanswered. It would undermine their attempts to establish territory. But that's exactly what he was counting on. Sometimes the best way to stop a threat wasn't to run from it or to fight it head-on, but to draw it out into the open, where it could be dealt with properly. He pulled out his phone and began making calls to other former Rangers he knew in the area. The Iron Serpents were about to learn a hard lesson about the difference between targeting random businesses and picking a fight with someone who'd spent his life dealing with threats far worse than them. I'll create Part 3, which reveals more about Harrison's background and establishes why he's uniquely qualified to handle this threat. This section needs to deepen our understanding of the protagonist while building tension. The morning sun had barely risen over Riverside Rest Area when State Police Lieutenant Jack Rivera pulled into the parking lot. Harrison was already at his usual table, reviewing maps on his tablet while drinking his morning coffee. Sarah worked the early shift herself, keeping a watchful eye on the lot after yesterday's confrontation. "Got your message, Hawk," Rivera said, settling into the seat across from Harrison. He was still in his early 40s, but the job had added years to his face. "Iron Serpents, huh? We've been tracking their movement up from Georgia. 3 rest areas shut down in the Carolinas already due to gang activity." Harrison turned his tablet slightly, showing Rivera a series of marked locations. "That fits their pattern. They're more organized than they appear." "You seem to know a lot about them," Rivera noted, accepting the coffee Sarah brought over. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Wait a minute. Harrison, you're not the same Hawk Harrison who ran those joint task force operations with DEA, are you?" A ghost of a smile crossed Harrison's face. Been a while since anyone's brought that up. Sarah, who had lingered nearby, looked curious. "Task force operations?" Rivera let out a low whistle. "Before my time, but I heard stories. Army Rangers working with federal agencies taking down organized crime operations that were using military-style tactics. You're that Harrison?" "Among other things," Harrison replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "Spent 15 years in the 75th Ranger Regiment. Last 5 commanding special operations task forces focused on organizations that used paramilitary structures. Groups that operated like military units but for criminal purposes." "Like motorcycle gangs?" Sarah asked, beginning to understand. Harrison nodded. "The sophisticated ones, yes. The Iron Serpents. They're not just random thugs. Their leadership structure, their tactics, they're modeled after military units. Their founder, a guy named Marcus Blade Kincaid, did 2 tours with the 82nd Airborne before being dishonorably discharged. He took what he learned about military organization and applied it to building a criminal empire." Rivera leaned forward, suddenly more intent. "That's why you didn't back down yesterday. You recognized their pattern. The 2 who came in, Viper and Torch, they're what we call scouts," Harrison explained. "They probe defenses, test responses, gather intelligence for the main force. Standard military reconnaissance tactics just applied to criminal operations." Sarah shuddered slightly. "So when they come back?" "They'll come in force," Harrison confirmed. "But that's exactly what we want." Rivera raised an eyebrow. "We want a gang attacking a rest area?" "We want them to commit," Harrison clarified. "Right now they're ghosts. They intimidate, threaten, but stay just under the radar enough that law enforcement can't build solid cases. We need to draw them out, make them show their hand." "Like you did in Operation Thunderbolt," Rivera said, recognition dawning. "The Carson City case. You let a cartel think they were winning until they exposed their entire operation." Harrison's eyes took on a distant look. "Lost 2 good men in that operation, but we shut down a pipeline that was moving 3 tons of drugs a month through military supply routes." He refocused on the present. The Iron Serpents are using the same playbook. They target transportation infrastructure, use intimidation to establish control, then turn the locations into distribution hubs. Sarah's face paled. Distribution hubs? You mean drugs? Among other things, Harrison nodded. Weapons, stolen goods, whatever's profitable. Rest areas are perfect, constant traffic, legitimate reason for vehicles to stop, multiple escape routes. Take control of enough of them along major highways, and you've got a distribution network that's hard to detect and even harder to shut down. Rivera rubbed his chin thoughtfully. And you think they're trying to establish that here? On my stretch of I-95? They're not trying, Harrison said grimly. They're doing it. Those 3 rest areas that shut down in the Carolinas? Guarantee they're already being used as transfer points. The Iron Serpents work their way up the highway system, like a snake moving along a branch. Each location they control becomes another link in their chain. Jesus, Rivera muttered. And now they're pushing into the northeast. Which is why we need to stop them here, Harrison stated firmly. Break their expansion, expose their operation, give law enforcement the evidence they need to shut them down completely. Sarah looked worried. But won't that put everyone here at risk? Our staff, the travelers? Harrison's expression softened slightly. Risk is already here, Sarah. Question is whether we face it on our terms or theirs. Rivera studied Harrison carefully. You've done this before. Not just Carson City, but other operations. 17 major cases, Harrison confirmed. Cartels, gangs, militia groups, any criminal organization that uses military structure and tactics. It's why I was selected to command the Joint Task Forces. Understanding how they think, how they operate, makes them predictable. And that's why you're still here, Rivera realized. You could have moved on after yesterday, let this become someone else's problem. But you recognized the threat for what it was. Harrison's eyes hardened. Some fights choose you. The Iron Serpents didn't just pick a rest area to intimidate. They picked the wrong one, with the wrong veteran sitting at the wrong table. Now they'll have to deal with the consequences of that mistake. The morning traffic was picking up, more travelers pulling in for coffee and restroom breaks, unaware of the conversation taking place or the storm gathering around them. Harrison watched them through the window, innocent people just trying to get where they needed to go. He'd spent his life protecting people like this, first in uniform, then with the task forces. The Iron Serpents were about to learn why that mission hadn't ended with his retirement. They'll be back today, he said quietly. Probably with at least a dozen riders. They'll want to make a show of force, demonstrate their power. I can have units standing by, Rivera offered. Harrison shook his head. Not yet. Let them come. Let them think they have the advantage. The bigger they make their show of force, the more evidence we'll have when we finally move against them. The sun climbed higher as they continued planning, Harrison sharing his experience while Rivera provided local knowledge. The Iron Serpents had picked this rest area thinking it would be an easy target. Instead, they'd stumbled into a carefully laid trap, even if they didn't know it yet. I'll create Part 4, which introduces the wider community and establishes what's at stake, building emotional investment in the outcome. The morning traffic flowed steadily through Riverside Rest Area as Harrison and Rivera continued their planning. Sarah had just brought them fresh coffee when Maya, the young barista, approached their table nervously. "Mr. Harrison?" she said, her voice quiet. "There's something you should know. Those bikers yesterday? They came back last night after closing. My brother Kevin works the overnight shift at the gas station across the highway. Said they were taking pictures of the rest area, writing things down." Harrison exchanged glances with Rivera. "Reconnaissance," he said. "They're mapping the layout, identifying entry points, planning their approach." Rivera nodded. "Classic military-style pre-operation surveillance." "That's not all," Maya continued, wringing her hands. "Kevin said they were asking questions about the staff, about our schedules. They know Sarah's got 2 kids in college, that I take care of my mom who's sick. It felt threatening." Harrison's expression hardened. "They're gathering intelligence for leverage, standard intimidation tactics, Show people you can get to their families if they don't cooperate. Just then, Tom Chen, Sarah's husband, burst through the door. He ran the small maintenance crew that kept the rest area functioning. "We've got trouble," he announced, approaching their table. "Someone sabotaged our delivery truck last night. Sugar in the gas tank, tires slashed. We can't make our supply runs." Sarah's face paled. "But we've got 3 busloads of seniors stopping here this afternoon. Part of that guided tour company that always uses our facility. We need those supplies." "That's deliberate timing," Harrison explained. "They want to show you they can disrupt your business at will, make you feel helpless, desperate for their protection." Mike Rodriguez, a long-haul trucker who regularly stopped at Riverside, joined their growing group. "It's not just here," he said, setting down his coffee cup. "Word's spreading up and down I-95. Iron Serpents are moving in hard. 3 drivers I know got run off rest stops in Maryland yesterday. Gangs marking their territory, making it clear which places are safe to stop and which aren't." "They're isolating targets," Harrison observed. "Controlling where people can and can't stop affects everything. Delivery schedules, transport routes, travel patterns. It's about more than just this rest area. They're trying to control the entire highway corridor." An elderly couple who regularly volunteered at the rest area's tourist information booth approached next. Martha and George Wilson had been helping travelers navigate the Northeast for over a decade. "We're scared," Martha admitted. "Some rough-looking men were here at dawn, taking our pictures, making notes. When George tried to ask them what they were doing, they said we should think real careful about whether we want to keep volunteering here." Harrison's jaw tightened. "They're targeting everyone connected to the facility, building a complete picture of who they need to intimidate or remove." Sarah looked around at her staff and the regular visitors who'd become like family. "These people, this place, it's more than just a rest stop. We help travelers, give them a safe place to rest. Truckers count on us. Tour groups trust us. We're part of making this highway safe and welcoming." "And that's exactly why they chose this location," Harrison explained. "High visibility, good reputation, strategic position. Taking control here doesn't just give them a base of operations. It sends a message about their power." Rivera checked his phone. "Just got word from state police. 2 more rest areas down south reported gang activity this morning. Iron Serpents are moving fast, coordinating their expansion." "Mr. Harrison," Maya said quietly, "what happens if we can't stop them? My mom's medical bills. I need this job." Tom stepped forward. "We've got employees depending on us, families to support. We can't just shut down like those other places did." "You won't have to," Harrison assured them. His voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced worse odds and prevailed. "But I need you all to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. The Iron Serpents will escalate. They'll threaten, intimidate, try to break each of you individually." "But we're not individuals," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with her conviction. "We're a community." Harrison smiled slightly. "Exactly. And that's something they don't understand. They're used to targeting isolated businesses, picking off weak points one by one. They don't expect unity, resistance, people standing together." "What can we do?" Mike the trucker asked. "I've got friends all up and down I-95, other drivers who are sick of being pushed around by these gangs. And I know every law enforcement agency from here to Florida," Rivera added. Harrison looked around at the group, seeing not fear but determination beginning to replace the uncertainty in their eyes. "First, we prepare. They'll be watching, expecting us to break under pressure. Instead, we'll give them exactly what they expect to see. A community that appears vulnerable, but is actually getting ready to fight back." Martha gripped George's hand tightly. "Just tell us what you need, Mr. Harrison. We may be old, but we've seen this rest area help too many people to let some gang take it over." The morning sun streamed through the windows as more regular patrons joined their group. Each person had a story, a connection to Riverside Rest Area, a reason to stand against the coming storm. Harrison watched them, reminded of other communities he'd helped defend, other groups of ordinary people who'd found extraordinary courage when united against a common threat. "They thought they were targeting just another rest area," he said quietly. "Instead, They're about to learn what happens when you threaten the wrong community, united behind the wrong veteran. The Iron Serpents were coming, but they wouldn't find an easy target. They'd find a prepared community, ready to stand together against whatever came next. I'll create Part 5, where tensions escalate, and the threat grows more serious with the antagonists returning in greater force. The afternoon sun beat down on Riverside Rest Area when the first rumble of motorcycles echoed across the parking lot. This time it wasn't just two bikes. A column of riders approached from the south, chrome glinting in the sunlight, the thunder of engines growing louder. Harrison watched from his usual table as 15 Iron Serpents bikes roared into the lot, moving in practiced formation. Viper led the pack with Torch close behind. The rest were new faces, each wearing the distinctive snake patch, their bikes strategically positioned to control the entrance and exit points. "Right on schedule," Harrison muttered to Rivera, who sat plainly clothed at a nearby table. Through their earpieces, they could hear Tom Chen's voice from his maintenance post. "Got 3 more bikes covering the service road. They're blocking the back exit." Sarah tried to keep her hand steady as she wiped down the counter, remembering Harrison's instructions to appear nervous but not panicked. Maya worked the coffee machine with deliberate focus, while Martha and George Wilson made a show of gathering their things from the information booth, playing their part in appearing intimidated. The bikers entered in waves, their boots heavy on the tile floor. Viper swaggered in first, scanning the rest area with cold satisfaction before spotting Harrison still at his table. "Well, look who's still here," Viper called out, his voice carrying an edge of menace. "Brought some friends this time, old-timer. Thought we should continue our conversation about how things are going to work around here." Harrison sipped his coffee calmly. "Nothing's changed since yesterday. This isn't your territory, and it's not going to be." A massive biker with a shaved head and facial scars stepped forward. His cut identified him as Butcher. "You don't get to make that call, Pops." "Look around. You see what's happening here?" Through the windows, more bikes arrived, bringing the total to nearly 20. Travelers hurriedly returned to their cars while truckers watched tensely from their rigs. The Iron Serpents had effectively surrounded the rest area. "I see a lot of people who are about to make a serious mistake," Harrison replied evenly, still not rising from his table. Viper circled closer, his confidence bolstered by numbers. "Let me explain something to you. Iron Serpents are moving up the coast. Every rest stop, every travel plaza from Georgia to Maine. It's all going to be our territory. You can't stop progress." "Progress?" Harrison's voice carried a hint of cold amusement. "Is that what you call extortion and drug trafficking?" Viper's eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses. "You really don't know when to shut up, do you? Been asking around about you, old man. Army Ranger, right? Used to be somebody? Well, this ain't the military, and you ain't in charge here." "That's right," Torch added, emboldened by the gang's presence. "This is happening whether you like it or not. Smart people are learning to cooperate." As if on cue, a nervous-looking man in a business suit approached Viper. He was the manager of a rest stop 30 miles south. "Mr. Viper, sir, like you asked, I've brought the preliminary agreement for the security arrangement we discussed." Harrison watched the interaction carefully. The Iron Serpents were showing their hand, demonstrating how other facilities had already submitted to their control. It was a calculated move, meant to demoralize resistance. "See?" Viper gestured triumphantly. "Smart business people understand the situation. You can fight progress and get hurt, or you can be reasonable and profit." Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "But we're a state facility. We can't just—" "The state?" Butcher laughed harshly. "Lady, we own half the state troopers in 3 jurisdictions already. By next month, it'll be all of them. Nobody's coming to help you." Harrison finally stood, his movement drawing all eyes. "Wrong on both counts. You don't own as much as you think, and help is closer than you realize." Something in his tone made several bikers shift uneasily, but Viper pressed on. "Big words from an old man. Maybe we need to show everyone what happens to people who don't understand their place." Torch and 2 other bikers moved to flank Harrison, but he didn't appear concerned. If anything, he seemed to be carefully noting their positions, their stances, cataloging everything with a soldier's practiced eye. "That's your problem," Harrison said quietly. "You think this is about showing strength, demonstrating power. You don't even realize you're walking into a trap." Viper's face darkened. "Only trap I see is the one you've put yourself in. We've got the numbers, the backing, the whole system working for us. You've got what? A bunch of scared civilians and delusions about being a hero?" "I've got something better," Harrison replied. "I've got you exactly where I want you, making exactly the mistakes I knew you'd make." Before Viper could respond, Rivera's voice crackled through Harrison's earpiece. "State police just picked up 3 of their lookouts on the highway. They were carrying enough meth to put them away for decades, almost like someone tipped us off about where to find them." Harrison allowed himself a small smile. The Iron Serpents thought they were showing force, but they were actually playing right into his hands. Every move they made, every threat they issued was being recorded, documented, added to the growing case against them. "Last chance," Viper snarled, clearly unsettled by Harrison's calm demeanor. "Either you and everyone else here learns to play ball, or things get really unpleasant." "No," Harrison said firmly. "This is your last chance. Walk away now. Find somewhere else to operate. Because if you push this, you're not just taking on me. You're taking on someone who spent his life dealing with threats bigger than you." The tension in the rest area was electric as both sides faced off. The Iron Serpents had come to demonstrate their power, but somehow this aging veteran had turned the situation around, making them feel like they were the ones being hunted. "This isn't over," Viper finally said, backing toward the door. "Not by a long shot." "Actually," Harrison replied quietly, "it's just beginning. 5, I'll create Part 6, which focuses on the strategic preparation phase, showing how Harrison organizes resources and prepares for the coming conflict." The evening sun cast long shadows across Riverside Rest Area as Harrison met with his growing team in the facility's maintenance office. Tom Chen had converted the space into an improvised command center, with maps and surveillance photos covering the walls. Lieutenant Rivera sat reviewing intelligence reports, while Sarah Chen and Maya coordinated with other rest area staff. "Here's what we know," Harrison said, pointing to a marked map of I-95. "Iron Serpents have established control points here, here, and here. They're using a standard military-style expansion pattern: secure supply lines, establish forward bases, then push into new territory." Mike Rodriguez, the trucker who'd become one of Harrison's key allies, stood studying the surveillance photos. "Got word from my network. They've got at least 50 full members moving up from Georgia, plus local recruits. They're not just some random gang, they're organized, disciplined." "That's what makes them dangerous," Harrison confirmed. "Their leader, Blade Kincaid, he's applying military doctrine to criminal operations. Each rest area they control becomes a forward operating base. They've got lookouts, communications, supply chains, just like a military unit." Rivera nodded grimly. "And they've got people inside the system. Just found out 2 of my deputies were on their payroll. Who knows how deep the corruption goes." "That's why we have to be careful who we trust," Harrison explained. "From here on out, we only work with people we can verify. I've got contacts from my Ranger days running background checks on everyone involved." Sarah approached with fresh intelligence. "Just heard from the night shift at the Route 1 rest stop. Iron Serpents tried to move in there this morning. When the manager resisted, they sabotaged their water supply." "Classic intimidation tactic," Harrison noted. "They're trying to show what happens to facilities that don't cooperate, but they're also showing us their playbook." Tom Chen unfurled a detailed blueprint of Riverside Rest Area. "I've been working on those security upgrades you suggested. Hidden cameras here, here, and here. Motion sensors covering all approach routes. Carl from the electronics store down the highway. He's a former Army Signal Corps. He's helping us set up a secure communication network." Harrison examined the modifications. "Good work. They'll be watching us, expecting us to fortify obvious positions. Instead, we're creating invisible layers of defense. Every move they make will be documented, every threat recorded." Maya, who'd been monitoring social media chatter, spoke up. "They're spreading rumors about us online. saying this place is unsafe, that travelers should use their protected rest stops instead. They're trying to hurt our business. Let them, Harrison said confidently. Every fake review, every piece of negative propaganda, it's all evidence of their organized campaign. Rivera's cybercrimes unit is tracking it all. Mike the trucker pulled out his phone. Got something else you should see. My buddies took these photos at their controlled rest stops. The images showed suspicious cars making brief stops, quick exchanges happening in parking lots. They're already using those locations for drug drops, classic dead drop techniques. Harrison studied the photos carefully. They're sloppy, getting overconfident. That works in our favor. He turned to the group. Everyone understand their roles? Sarah nodded. Keep operating normally, document everything, but appear increasingly nervous. Make them think their pressure is working. Exactly, Harrison confirmed. They expect resistance to crumble under pressure. Instead, we're creating a trap. Every threat they make, every act of intimidation, it's all building our case. Rivera checked his phone. Got word from FBI contacts. They're interested in our operation. Apparently, the Iron Serpents have connections to larger criminal organizations. Taking them down here could expose networks all along the East Coast. That's why we have to do this right, Harrison emphasized. No premature moves, no direct confrontations yet. We let them think they're winning. Let them commit fully to taking this location. The bigger they come at us, the more evidence we'll have. The radio crackled with a report from one of their lookouts. Got movement on the South Access Road. Looks like they're setting up observation posts. Good, Harrison said quietly. Let them watch. Everything they see will be exactly what we want them to see. Martha and George Wilson, the elderly information booth volunteers, entered with their own report. Those bikers who threatened us? They've been asking questions around town, learning our routines, our connections. They're building target profiles, Harrison explained. Standard military intelligence gathering, but we can use that against them. Feed them information that serves our purposes. As the meeting continued, more allies arrived. Veterans Harrison had called in, truckers from Mike's network, even former law enforcement who'd heard about their stand against the Iron Serpents. Each brought skills, resources, and determination to the fight. Remember, Harrison addressed the group, they think they're dealing with an isolated rest area, a few scared civilians, and one aging veteran. That's their critical mistake. While they're focusing on intimidation, we're building a network that will ultimately bring them down. The sun had set completely now, but Riverside Rest Area hummed with hidden activity. Behind the scenes of normal operation, a sophisticated resistance was taking shape. Harrison watched his team at work, reminded of other operations, other units he'd commanded. The Iron Serpents thought they were the hunters, but they were about to learn what it meant to take on someone who'd spent his life outsmarting more dangerous enemies. They'll make their next move soon, he told Rivera quietly. Probably tomorrow. Something big, trying to break our spirit. We'll be ready, Rivera assured him. Harrison nodded, his eyes hard. Yes, we will. And when they finally realize what they've walked into, it'll be too late. I'll create Part 7, which focuses on the first major confrontation that demonstrates the protagonist's capabilities and reveals the true nature of the conflict. The confrontation began just before midnight. 20 Iron Serpents bikes roared into Riverside Rest Area's parking lot, their headlights cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes. Behind them came 3 black SUVs, their windows tinted, their approach deliberate and menacing. Harrison watched from his position inside, noting how they deployed in a practiced formation. Viper and Torch led the main group, while other riders secured the perimeter. The SUVs parked in a triangle pattern, standard protective configuration. These weren't just gang members showing force. This was a military-style operation. Right on schedule, Harrison murmured into his radio. Through his earpiece, he could hear his team reporting positions. Rivera's undercover units were in place. Mike's truckers had their rigs strategically positioned, and Tom Chen's surveillance system was recording everything. Sarah and Maya worked the late shift, playing their roles perfectly, appearing nervous but maintaining operations. The few travelers in the rest area sensed the tension and quickly departed, leaving only those who were part of Harrison's plan. Viper entered first, flanked by Butcher and 6 other bikers. They'd abandoned any pretense of subtlety, openly carrying chains and clubs. Behind them came a man Harrison recognized immediately, Marcus Blade Kincaid himself, the Iron Serpents leader. He wore an expensive leather jacket over his cut, his military bearing evident in every movement. "This the one?" Blade asked, studying Harrison with cold eyes. "Yeah, boss," Viper confirmed. "The Ranger who thinks he can stand in our way." Blade approached Harrison's table slowly. "You know, when I heard some old vet was causing problems, I didn't expect to find James Hawk Harrison, 75th Ranger Regiment. Your reputation precedes you." "As does yours," Harrison replied calmly. "Marcus Kincaid, 82nd Airborne until that unfortunate incident in Afghanistan. Decided to apply your military training to building a criminal empire instead." Blade's eyes narrowed. "You've done your homework. Just like you taught your men to do," Harrison noted. "Reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, coordinated operations. Almost impressive if you weren't using those skills to terrorize innocent people." The Iron Serpents leader smiled coldly. "See, that's where you're wrong. We're not terrorists. We're businessmen. This is simply a hostile takeover." He gestured around the rest area. "You've seen our growth, our expansion. This location will belong to us. The only question is how many people get hurt before. You accept that?" As if on cue, more bikers entered, dragging Kevin, Maya's brother, from the gas station across the highway. The young man's face was bruised, but his eyes showed more anger than fear. "Found him taking pictures of our boys," Torch announced. Trying to gather evidence, Maya started forward, but Harrison's slight headshake stopped her. Everything was proceeding exactly as he'd anticipated. "This is your last warning," Blade stated flatly. "Surrender control of this facility or we start making examples. Not just of your people here, but their families, their friends, anyone connected to this place." Harrison stood slowly, his movements measured. "You're making the same mistake a lot of military men make when they go bad, Blade. You think because you know tactics, because you can plan operations, you're invincible. Seems to be working so far," Blade sneered. "Look around, Harrison. We've got the numbers, the territory, the whole system working for us. You've got what? A few scared civilians and some outdated training?" "Actually," Harrison's voice carried absolute certainty, "I've got you exactly where I want you." Before Blade could respond, the night exploded into action. Hidden lights blazed to life, temporarily blinding the unprepared bikers. Mike's trucks roared to life, blocking the exit points that the Iron Serpents thought they controlled. Rivera's undercover units emerged from concealment, well-armed and ready. Harrison moved with practiced efficiency as Torch rushed him. The younger man's chain whistled through empty air as Harrison stepped inside his guard. 2 precise strikes and Torch was on the ground, his weapon clattering away. Butcher came next, but found himself facing not an old veteran, but a combat-hardened ranger who'd spent decades perfecting his skills. "Federal agents!" Multiple voices shouted as FBI personnel emerged from their hiding spots. The operation Harrison had been carefully orchestrating was now in full swing. Blade, realizing he'd walked into a trap, reached for a concealed weapon but froze at Harrison's command. "I wouldn't. Your SUV drivers are already in custody, and that shipment of meth in their trunks, that's federal time." The Iron Serpents leader's face contorted with rage. "You set this up. All of it." "Like I said," Harrison replied calmly, "I got you exactly where I wanted you. Every threat, every act of intimidation, all recorded. Your whole operation is compromised." "You think this stops anything?" Blade snarled as federal agents moved to secure him. "We've got people everywhere. This is just one location." "No," Harrison corrected him. "This is the beginning of your organization's end. Right now, similar operations are hitting your controlled rest stops all along I-95. Your entire network is being rolled up." Through his earpiece, Harrison could hear confirmation of arrests at multiple locations. The Iron Serpent's carefully built empire was crumbling in a single night. As the federal agents led Blade away, Harrison turned to check on Kevin, who was being treated by medics. The young man managed a pained smile. Worth a few bruises to see those guys taken down. Sarah approached Harrison, watching the arrests continue. Is it really over? This phase is, Harrison replied. But there's more work to do. We didn't just catch criminals tonight. We exposed a network of corruption that needs to be cleaned out. Rivera joined them, holstering his weapon. FBI's already got confessions from 3 of Blade's lieutenants. They're racing to make deals, giving up everything they know. Harrison nodded, watching the last of the Iron Serpents being loaded into transport vehicles. They'd come expecting to break a community's spirit. Instead, they'd fallen into a carefully laid trap, sprung by someone who'd spent his life dealing with threats far worse than them. The night's operation had been a success, but Harrison knew this was just the beginning. The Iron Serpent's influence ran deep, and it would take time to root out all their corruption. But tonight had proven something important. When communities stand together, when they refuse to be intimidated, even the most dangerous criminals can be brought down. Looking around at his team, at the community that had united against a common threat, Harrison allowed himself a small smile. The Iron Serpents had thought they were targeting just another rest area. Instead, they'd picked a fight with exactly the wrong veteran, and now they would pay the price for that mistake. I'll create Part 8, which reveals the larger conspiracy and deeper implications of the Iron Serpents operation. The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Rest Area as FBI Special Agent Karen Torres spread files across Harrison's usual table. The area remained closed to the public, while federal teams processed evidence, but the magnitude of what they'd uncovered was just beginning to emerge. It's bigger than we thought, Torres explained, laying out surveillance photos and financial records. The Iron Serpents weren't just a gang expanding territory. They were the enforcement arm of something much larger. Harrison studied the documents, his expression grim. Cartel connections? Worse, Torres replied. We found links to international weapons trafficking, money laundering operations, even human trafficking rings. The rest areas weren't just distribution points for drugs. They were hubs in a sophisticated criminal network. Rivera joined them looking exhausted after a night of coordinating arrests. Just got word from DEA. Those SUVs we seized? Hidden compartments were packed with more than just meth. They found encrypted phones, account numbers, detailed records of payoffs to officials in 3 states. Blade was sloppy, Harrison noted. Keeping evidence like that close, he should have known better. That's just it, Torres interjected. We don't think he did know. The Iron Serpents, they were just one piece of the puzzle. Someone bigger was using them, letting them think they were building their own empire while actually setting up infrastructure for larger criminal enterprises. Sarah approached with fresh coffee, her face tight with concern. More FBI vehicles just arrived. They've got Financial Crimes Division on them. Harrison nodded. Follow the money. Classic investigation technique. He turned to Torres. What are you finding? Shell companies, front businesses, complicated financial networks, she replied. Every rest area the Iron Serpents controlled became part of a larger operation. The gang provided muscle, kept people scared and looking the other way, while the real activity happened behind the scenes. Mike the trucker approached their table, his face grim. Got something you need to see. He pulled out his phone, showing photos from other locations. These were taken at Iron Serpents controlled rest stops last month. See these shipping containers? They're moving through at regular intervals, always at night. Harrison examined the images carefully. Human trafficking, he said quietly. Using the rest areas as transfer points. Victims moved in containers, switched between vehicles during legitimate delivery stops. Jesus, Rivera muttered. Right under our noses. Torres spread out more documents. It gets worse. We found evidence of cooperation between multiple criminal organizations. The Iron Serpents weren't just expanding their territory, they were establishing a network that any group could use for a price. A criminal infrastructure, Harrison concluded, built into the legitimate transportation system. Blade might have started this thinking he was building his own empire, but someone else was pulling the strings. Tom Chen approached with printouts from their surveillance system. Found something in the background of our security footage. Look at these vehicles. They pass through every week, same time like clockwork. Harrison studied the patterns. Professional. Military precision. This isn't street-level crime. This is organized, strategic. That fits with what we're finding, Torres confirmed. Bank records show transfers from accounts linked to international crime syndicates. The Iron Serpents were being paid to establish and maintain this network, probably without even realizing who they really worked for. Maya, who had been listening nearby, spoke up. But why here? Why these rest areas? Location, Harrison explained. I-95 is the main artery of the East Coast. Control the rest areas, you control movement. Perfect cover too. Thousands of vehicles stop every day, all legitimate traffic. Hide illegal operations in plain sight. Rivera's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. Just got word from state police. 2 of our senior commanders were found dead in their homes, made to look like suicides. They're cleaning house, Harrison said grimly. Eliminating anyone who could expose the larger operation. The Iron Serpents were just the visible face. Now the real players are protecting themselves. Torres nodded. Already seeing it. Some of our best leads are going cold. Witnesses disappearing, evidence vanishing, accounts being emptied. This is why they sent Blade personally, Harrison realized. When we resisted here, it threatened their whole network. They needed to shut us down quickly before we exposed the bigger picture. Sarah looked worried. So it's not over? No, Harrison confirmed. We've cut off one head of the Hydra, but the real fight is just beginning. The Iron Serpents were dangerous, but they were just enforcers. Now we're dealing with something much bigger. People with real power, real resources. What do we do? Rivera asked. Harrison stood, moving to the window where he could watch federal teams continuing their investigation. We use what we've learned. The Iron Serpents gave us a window into their operation. Now we follow every lead, trace every connection, expose every part of their network. They'll fight back, Torres warned. These aren't street thugs like the Iron Serpents. These are sophisticated criminals with international connections. Good, Harrison said quietly. Let them come. Every move they make trying to protect their operation will expose more of their network. They thought using a biker gang as cover would keep them hidden. Instead, they've given us exactly what we need to bring down their entire organization. The morning traffic continued to flow past Riverside Rest Area, travelers unaware of the significant revelations taking place inside. What had started as a stand against gang intimidation had exposed a criminal conspiracy that stretched across borders and reached into the highest levels of power. Harrison watched a federal team uncovering more hidden cameras the Iron Serpents had installed. They thought they were watching us, he mused. Never realized we were really watching them, using their own operation to expose something much bigger. The real war was just beginning, but they'd gained something crucial: knowledge of what they were really fighting. The Iron Serpents had been just the tip of the iceberg, and now Harrison and his allies were positioned to strike at the heart of a criminal empire that had hidden in plain sight for far too long. The afternoon sun beat down on Riverside Rest Area as Harrison reviewed the latest threats with his team. In the 3 days since the Iron Serpents leaders had been arrested, the pressure had intensified in ways none of them had expected. The real powers behind the operation were making their move. They hit Sarah's daughter's college fund this morning, Rivera reported grimly. Somehow drained the entire account. Her scholarship's been mysteriously revoked too. Sarah's hands trembled as she poured coffee. They sent pictures of Amy at her campus in Boston. They're watching her, following her between classes. Same with my mom, Maya added, her voice tight. Someone broke into her house last night, didn't steal anything. Just left photos of her medical records on her bed. They're telling us they can get to our families whenever they want. Harrison's jaw tightened. Classic escalation, they're showing us the real cost of resistance. Special Agent Torres spread out new intelligence reports. It's not just personal threats. We've uncovered a coordinated campaign to destroy this whole community. Bank loans being called in, business licenses suddenly under review, health code violations appearing out of nowhere. Tom Chen burst through the door, his face pale. They just canceled all our operating permits. State officials are saying this facility is temporarily shut down for safety violations. And look at this, Mike the trucker added, showing them his phone. Every trucking company that regularly stops here is getting warning notices. Insurance rates tripled overnight. Safety certifications under review. Harrison studied the patterns of attack. They're isolating us, cutting off support from every angle. Financial pressure, bureaucratic pressure, personal threats, hitting every possible vulnerability simultaneously. Rivera's radio crackled with urgent reports. 3 more state officials who'd been cooperating with their investigation had been found dead. Key witnesses were disappearing. Evidence was vanishing from secure storage. These aren't street thugs like the Iron Serpents, Torres observed. This is professional, coordinated. They've got people at every level of the system. Through the windows, they could see more official vehicles arriving. Health inspectors, safety regulators, tax auditors, each carrying papers, each finding critical violations that needed immediate attention. Martha and George Wilson approached, the elderly information booth volunteers looking shaken. "Someone visited our grandson's school today," Martha said quietly. "Took pictures of him at recess. Left them in our mailbox with a note. Think about his future." Harrison's phone buzzed with a message from one of his Ranger's contacts. Text appeared. "They're squeezing hard. 3 of my sources have gone dark. Someone's cleaning house, eliminating anyone who might talk." "Look at this," Maya called from her phone. "They're flooding social media with fake reviews, claims of food poisoning, accusations of criminal activity. Our reputation is being destroyed hour by hour." Sarah watched another group of travelers turn away at the entrance, scared off by the growing official presence. "We're losing everything," she whispered. "Everything we built, everything we worked for." "That's their goal," Harrison explained. "Total pressure from all sides. Make us feel completely isolated, helpless. Break our spirit before breaking us physically." Torres checked her phone, her expression grim. "FBI's under pressure too. Higher-ups are suggesting we're assess priorities in this investigation. Someone's pulling strings at the federal level." "Same with state police," Rivera added. "Got word this morning. I'm under internal investigation. They're trying to discredit anyone involved in exposing this operation." The pressure continued mounting as the day progressed. More officials arrived, more threats emerged, more evidence of their opponent's reach became clear. Every hour brought new revelations of how deeply their enemies had infiltrated legitimate systems. "Even my military contacts are going quiet," Harrison noted, checking another message. "Someone's reaching into classified records, finding pressure points we didn't even know existed." Maya's phone chimed with another threat. Pictures of her mother's medical team, suggesting her care might suffer unfortunate complications. Tom Chen received building code violations that would cost millions to address. Mike the trucker learned his license was under review. "They're trying to make us feel like there's no way out," Harrison observed, watching his team struggle with the mounting pressure. "Want us to believe the system itself is against us." Sarah approached his table, her voice low. Maybe we should stop. They're hurting too many people. Every hour we resist, someone else suffers." Harrison understood her fear. The pressure was immense, designed to break even the strongest will. But he also saw something their opponents didn't: the strength in unity, the power of people standing together against intimidation. "Listen," he gathered his core team close. "This is their maximum effort. They're showing us everything they can do, every system they control, every pressure point they can hit. But in doing so, they're also showing us their network, their methods, their true reach." "And that helps us how?" Maya asked, clutching another threatening photo. "Because now we can see the whole machine," Harrison explained. "Every official they corrupt, every system they manipulate, it all leaves traces. They think they're breaking us, but they're really exposing themselves." The sun began to set on Riverside Rest Area, casting long shadows across the facility now swarming with hostile officials. The pressure was at its peak, the threats more serious than ever. But in Harrison's eyes, there was a glint of strategic calculation. Their opponents thought they were watching a community break under pressure. Instead, They were revealing their entire operation to someone who'd spent his life identifying and dismantling criminal enterprises. The question wasn't whether Riverside would survive this onslaught. It was whether their enemies would realize their mistake before it was too late. Dawn broke over Riverside Rest Area, casting an amber glow across the parking lot now empty of its usual morning traffic. Harrison sat at his regular table, but he wasn't alone. The space around him had transformed overnight, filled with faces both familiar and new, all united by a common purpose. "Enough is enough," Mike Rodriguez declared, standing before the gathered crowd. "They think they can threaten our families. Well, I've got 300 truckers who've parked their rigs at strategic points along a 95. Let's see how their operation runs with every major rest stop and delivery point under surveillance." Sarah Chen, still shaken but resolute, stepped forward. "We've got proof of their financial manipulation. My cousin at the SEC, she's been quietly documenting every suspicious transaction. The paper trail goes back years." "That matches what we've found," Special Agent Torres added, spreading out new files. "Every threat they've made, every official they've corrupted, it's all evidence. They thought they were breaking us. Instead, they've given us a map of their entire operation." Harrison watched as more allies emerged from the shadows. Carl Martinez, the ex-Signal Corps technician, had brought a team of cybersecurity experts. "We've been backtracing their digital threats," he reported. "Found their communication networks. Right now they think they're watching us, but we're actually monitoring them." "Got something else," Tom Chen called out, entering with a group of construction workers. "Remember those building code violations they hit us with? Every inspector who signed off on them has connections to shell companies we've traced back to their organization. It's all documented." Lieutenant Rivera's phone buzzed with updates from his trusted deputies. "State police in 3 states are moving against corrupted officials. The clean ones are tired of being undermined by criminals. They're ready to stand with us." Martha and George Wilson had mobilized a network of retired professionals, lawyers, accountants, former government workers. "We've been analyzing their pattern of regulatory abuse," Martha explained. "Found evidence of systematic corruption going back a decade." Harrison stood, addressing the gathered crowd. "They thought isolating us would break us. Instead, it's united us. Every person they threatened, every family they targeted, it's all brought more allies to our cause." Maya, who'd been monitoring social media, spoke up excitedly. "It's working. Other communities are speaking out. Rest stops all along the East Coast are sharing their stories of intimidation. The pattern is becoming clear to everyone. And that's their fatal mistake," Harrison explained. "They're used to operating in shadows, using fear to keep people quiet. But when people stand together, share information, support each other, the shadows start to disappear." Special Agent Torres checked her phone. "FBI's got new backing from the Justice Department. Those pressure calls from above? They triggered internal investigations. The corruption is being exposed at every level." "Same with state police," Rivera added. "The good cops are done being pushed around by criminals in suits. We're taking back our departments." Sarah watched as more vehicles arrived. Not threatening officials this time, but supporters. Other rest area managers, business owners, community leaders. All bringing resources, information, and determination. "They hit us with everything they had," Harrison observed. "Used every system they controlled, every pressure point they could find. But they didn't understand what they were really dealing with." Mike the trucker grinned. "They thought they were fighting one rest area, one community. Instead, they're facing an entire network of people who've had enough." The radio crackled with updates from their growing network. Corrupt officials were being identified and isolated. Their enemies' financial transactions were being frozen. Their communication networks were being mapped and monitored. "Here's what happens next," Harrison addressed the group. "They'll realize their pressure tactics have failed. They'll try to strike hard, eliminate what they see as a growing threat. That's when we'll have them." "Because we'll be ready," Torres confirmed. "Every move they make now will only expose more of their operation." The morning sun climbed higher as more allies arrived. Veterans Harrison had served with, bringing military precision to their operations. Federal agents who'd been quietly building cases for years. community leaders tired of watching criminals hijack legitimate systems. "Remember," Harrison said, his voice carrying across the now crowded rest area. "They thought fear was their weapon. Isolation was their strategy. But they didn't count on something more powerful. People standing together, supporting each other, refusing to be intimidated." Sarah looked around at the gathered crowd, seeing strength where there had been fear, determination where there had been doubt. "They wanted to break us," she realized. "Instead, they made us stronger." "That's what they never understand," Harrison replied. "Real strength isn't about power or control. It's about community, about people standing together against intimidation." The sun rose fully on Riverside Rest Area, illuminating not a broken community, but a united force preparing to strike back. Their opponents had played their strongest hand, applied their maximum pressure, and failed to break them. Now it was their turn to show what happened when people refused to be intimidated, when communities united against corruption, when the wrong veteran inspired the right response to criminal intimidation. The real battle was about to begin, and this time they weren't just defending one rest area. They were taking down an entire criminal empire. The confrontation began at midnight. Harrison watched from his position as a convoy of black SUVs and motorcycles approached Riverside Rest Area. Their enemies had finally realized that pressure tactics had failed. Now they were coming to end things personally. Multiple vehicles approaching from all directions, Mike's voice crackled through the radio. "Counting at least 30 bikes, 8 SUVs. These aren't just Iron Serpents, these are professional hitters." "Right on schedule," Harrison replied calmly. Through his earpiece, he could hear Torres coordinating with federal teams hidden in position. Rivera's trusted officers were in place. Every approach was covered, every angle monitored. The convoy entered the parking lot in a practiced formation. Leading them was a figure Harrison recognized from intelligence briefings, Viktor Petrov, the real power behind the operation. The international crime boss had finally emerged from the shadows. "Someone must have realized they're about to lose everything," Torres noted from her concealed position. "Petrov never shows himself like this." Harrison watched as Petrov's security team deployed around the rest area. They moved with military precision. These weren't street thugs like the Iron Serpents, but trained professionals. Among them were corrupt former law enforcement, dishonorably discharged special forces, mercenaries for hire. Petrov entered first, flanked by guards. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to absolute power. Behind him came a mix of criminal leadership, cartel representatives, trafficking bosses, money launderers. The entire criminal hierarchy had emerged to deal with the threat to their operation. "Mr. Harrison," Petrov called out, his accent slightly Russian. "I was hoping we could have a civilized discussion about recent events." Harrison stood calmly at his usual table. "Nothing civilized about what you've built here, Victor. Using rest areas as fronts for human trafficking, running drugs through family businesses, corrupting law enforcement?" Petrov smiled coldly. "Business is business. We offered you money, offered to make this easy. Instead, you've forced us to take more direct action." "Like murdering state officials?" Harrison asked. "Threatening families? Trying to destroy an entire community?" "Necessary demonstrations of power," Petrov replied. "But now we finish this. Tonight, this rest area burns. Everyone connected to your little resistance disappears. A clear message about the cost of defiance." As if on cue, more vehicles arrived. Harrison could see teams setting up what looked like explosives, while others moved to cut off escape routes. They were preparing to eliminate every trace of resistance. "You still don't understand what you're really fighting, do you?" Harrison asked quietly. Petrov's smile faltered slightly. "I understand perfectly. One old veteran, playing hero, inspiring some misguided community resistance. But look around, Mr. Harrison. You're surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned." "Am I?" Harrison's voice carried absolute certainty. Before Petrov could respond, the night erupted into coordinated action. Hidden floodlights blazed to life, temporarily blinding the unprepared criminals. Mike's network of truckers suddenly activated, their rigs blocking all escape routes. Federal teams emerged from concealment, while state police units appeared on every access road. "Federal agents!" Torres's voice boomed through a megaphone. "The facility is surrounded. We have air support incoming. Surrender now!" Petrov's face contorted with rage as he realized the trap. His security team moved to engage, but found themselves facing not frightened civilians but trained operators. Veterans Harrison had positioned precisely for this moment. "You think this stops anything?" Petrov snarled, reaching for a weapon. "I own judges, politicians." "Not anymore," Harrison replied calmly. "While you were focused on intimidating one rest area, we were documenting everything. Every threat, every bribe, every connection. Right now, similar operations are hitting your facilities all along the East Coast." Through his earpiece, Harrison could hear confirmation of simultaneous raids at multiple locations. The entire criminal network was being dismantled in a single, coordinated strike. "Impossible," Petrov whispered, watching his security team being systematically taken down. "Our operation was perfect." "Your mistake," Harrison explained, "was thinking fear was power. You never understood that sometimes intimidation doesn't break people, it unites them." The fight was brief but intense. Petrov's professionals were good, but they were facing a prepared force of federal agents, state police, and combat veterans, all coordinated by someone who'd spent his life planning operations like this. Within minutes, the parking lot was filled with arrested criminals. Torres personally cuffed Petrov while Rivera coordinated with arriving backup units. Evidence teams moved in, securing documents and devices that would expose the entire operation. "You've no idea what you've done," Petrov spat as he was led away. "The people behind this are already being arrested," Harrison finished. "Your entire network is compromised. Every shell company, every corrupt official, every trafficking route, it's all being shut down as we speak." Sarah emerged from the rest area, watching the arrests continue. "Is it really over?" Harrison nodded. "This part is. They came here thinking they could eliminate a threat to their operation. Instead, they walked into a trap that will bring down their entire empire." "Because we stood together," Maya added, joining them. "Exactly," Harrison confirmed. "They thought fear would isolate us, break us apart. Instead, it united us, made us stronger, and now their whole operation is exposed." The night sky filled with the sound of helicopters as federal backup arrived. What had started as criminal intimidation of a simple rest area had led to the exposure and dismantling of an international crime network. Harrison watched as the last of the criminals were loaded into transport vehicles. The Iron Serpents had made a fatal mistake targeting his rest area, but the real victory belonged to the community that had refused to be intimidated, that had stood together against corruption and crime. The dawn was breaking over Riverside Rest Area, marking the end of one battle and the beginning of a new chapter. The shadow of criminal intimidation had been lifted, not just here, but all along the East Coast, all because a group of criminals had made the mistake of threatening the wrong veteran at the wrong rest area. The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Rest Area as federal teams processed the last of the arrests. Special Agent Torres approached Harrison's table with preliminary reports, while Rivera coordinated with state police units still securing evidence. "Final numbers are coming in," Torres said, spreading out documents. 47 arrests here alone, including Petrov and 6 other major crime bosses. Simultaneous raids across the East Coast netted another 200 suspects. "Seized assets?" Harrison asked, scanning the reports. "Over $300 million so far, and we're still counting. Bank accounts, properties, vehicles, their entire infrastructure. Plus evidence of corruption reaching into state governments, law enforcement, even federal agencies." Sarah brought fresh coffee, her movements more relaxed now that the immediate threat was gone. "Just heard from Amy. The FBI team you sent arrived at her campus. She's safe." "Same with my mom," Maya added. "They caught 2 of Petrov's men watching her house. They were planning something for tonight." Rivera joined them, holstering his phone. "Getting updates from other locations. 3 more corrupted police commanders arrested. State investigators are finding evidence going back years. Bribes, threats, murdered witnesses." "The Iron Serpents were just the beginning," Torres noted. "Their attempted takeover here exposed something much bigger. Every rest area they controlled was part of a sophisticated criminal network. Harrison studied the surveillance photos showing similar operations being dismantled up and down Interstate 95. They got sloppy, pushed too hard, too fast. Their whole system depended on staying hidden, using fear to keep people quiet. But they picked the wrong place to threaten, Mike the trucker said, approaching with his own updates. Got word from my network. Their entire transportation system is compromised. We're finding evidence of trafficking operations at dozens of locations. Tom Chen emerged from the maintenance office where he'd been working with federal tech teams. Their communication network is completely exposed. Every encrypted message, every threat, every order, it's all documented now. What happens to all the people they corrupted? Sarah asked, watching another group of arrested officials being led away. They're turning on each other, Torres explained. Everyone's racing to make deals, giving up information about higher-level players. The whole corrupt system is unraveling. Harrison nodded. That's how these operations fall. Fear keeps people loyal only as long as the organization seems invincible. Once it starts crumbling, everyone looks to save themselves. Through the windows, they could see more federal vehicles arriving. Evidence teams, forensic accountants, corruption investigators. What had started as a local stand against gang intimidation had exposed a criminal enterprise that spanned the entire East Coast. You know what really brought them down? Rivera mused, watching the activity. They thought fear was their greatest weapon, never realized it could also be their biggest weakness. Because fear can isolate people, make them feel helpless, Harrison agreed. Or it can unite them, make them stand together against a common threat. Sarah looked around at her staff, the regular customers, the community that had refused to be intimidated. We didn't just save a rest area, did we? No, Harrison confirmed. We exposed a criminal network that was corrupting entire communities. Every person they threatened, every family they targeted, they're all free now. Torres checked her phone as more updates arrived. Petrov's international connections are being exposed. Interpol's involved now. This is going to disrupt criminal operations across multiple countries. All because they thought they could intimidate one community, Maya said, a note of pride in her voice. Harrison watched as more evidence was collected, more arrests processed, more corruption exposed. The Iron Serpents had made a critical mistake targeting Riverside Rest Area. That mistake had led federal authorities right to the heart of a major criminal enterprise. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now we rebuild, Harrison replied. Not just here, but everywhere their corruption touched. They spent years creating a system based on fear and intimidation. We prove there's something stronger. Communities standing together, refusing to be broken. The morning continued as federal teams worked to process the massive amount of evidence collected. What had started as criminal intimidation at a simple rest area had led to one of the largest organized crime busts in recent history. Harrison remained at his usual table, watching the operation unfold. The Iron Serpents and their criminal backers had thought they were targeting an easy mark. Instead, they'd picked a fight with exactly the wrong veteran at exactly the wrong place. And now their entire empire was crumbling as a result. 1 week after Petrov's arrest, Riverside Rest Area had become the center of a massive federal investigation. Harrison sat with Special Agent Torres and Lieutenant Rivera, reviewing the expanding impact of their operation. Latest numbers from the FBI task force, Torres reported. Over 500 arrests across 12 states. We've seized nearly $800 million in assets, uncovered corruption in 30 police departments, and exposed links to international crime syndicates in 6 countries. The domino effect is staggering, Rivera added. Every person we arrest leads to 3 more. Corrupt officials are racing to make deals, exposing decades of criminal activity. Harrison studied the map showing the scope of their investigation. Red pins marked locations where Petrov's organization had been dismantled, spreading like a web across the eastern seaboard. They built their empire on fear, using each corrupted location to expand their influence further. And now it's all coming down, Torres confirmed. Interpol just arrested Petrov's European contacts. His entire international network is unraveling. Banking records show he was moving billions through seemingly legitimate businesses. Mike Rodriguez entered with updates from his trucker network. Every rest area they controlled is being cleaned out. Found evidence of trafficking operations we never suspected. They were using our highways to move everything: drugs, weapons, people. The truly remarkable part, Rivera noted, is how many people are coming forward now. Communities all along I-95 are reporting years of intimidation, corruption, criminal activity they were too afraid to expose before. Sarah approached with fresh coffee and her own news. Just heard from 3 other rest areas. Their managers want to implement our security protocols, create a network to prevent this from happening again. That's what Petrov never understood, Harrison explained. He thought fear would keep people isolated, make them easy to control. Instead, it created a network of resistance just waiting for a chance to fight back. Torres checked her phone as more updates arrived. DEA just found their main drug pipeline. They were using legitimate shipping companies as cover, moving product through commercial transport routes. The company's owners were being blackmailed into cooperation. Classic operation, Harrison nodded. Use intimidation to corrupt legitimate businesses, then hide criminal activity behind legal operations. But it only works if people stay afraid, stay quiet. Through the windows, they could see more federal teams arriving. The investigation had grown beyond anything they'd initially imagined, exposing corruption at every level of society. Got word from the Justice Department, Torres added. They're creating a special task force based on what we uncovered here, using our operation as a template for fighting organized crime through community resistance. Rivera's phone buzzed with new information. State police just arrested 3 judges and a state senator, found evidence of years of corruption, cases fixed, investigations buried. Petrov's influence went deeper than anyone realized. But now it's all exposed, Harrison said quietly. Every threat they made, every person they intimidated, every system they corrupted, it's all becoming evidence. Their greatest weapon became their greatest vulnerability. Sarah watched as another group of arrested officials was led to federal transport vehicles. It's amazing how many lives this affected, not just here, but everywhere their corruption reached. That's why they fought so hard to keep control of this location, Harrison explained. They knew if one community successfully resisted, others would follow. Fear only works if people believe they're alone. Torres spread out new intelligence reports. We're finding connections to other criminal organizations, other corruption networks. This investigation could expand for years, cleaning out decades of embedded criminal influence. All because they picked the wrong rest area to threaten, Maya added, joining them with updates from their surveillance systems. Harrison nodded. They thought they were just dealing with one community, one veteran who wouldn't back down. They never realized they were exposing their entire operation to someone who'd spent his life dismantling criminal enterprises. The afternoon sun highlighted the constant activity at Riverside Rest Area. As more evidence was processed, more connections uncovered, more corruption exposed. What had started as criminal intimidation at a simple rest stop had triggered a chain reaction that was cleaning out decades of organized crime. This is bigger than just stopping criminals, Harrison observed. We're showing communities everywhere that they don't have to live in fear, that standing together is stronger than any threat. The impact of their victory continued to spread, reaching far beyond the immediate conflict. Petrov's empire wasn't just being dismantled, it was becoming a blueprint for how communities could resist and defeat organized crime. 1 month after Petrov's arrest, Riverside Rest Area hosted a community gathering to celebrate their victory and recognize its lasting impact. The parking lot was filled with families, truckers, law enforcement, and federal agents, all united by their shared triumph over organized crime. Final report from Washington, Special Agent Torres announced, joining Harrison at his usual table. Petrov's entire organization has been dismantled. His testimony exposed criminal networks in 12 countries, over $2 billion in assets seized, hundreds of corrupted officials arrested, and dozens of trafficking operations shut down. Harrison watched the gathered crowd, seeing not just victory but transformation. More important than the numbers is what this proved. that communities can stand against organized crime and win. Sarah approached with news from her growing network of rest area managers. We've established a new security coalition. Every facility from Maine to Florida is implementing protocols we developed here. Real-time communication, shared intelligence, community engagement. We're making sure nothing like this happens again. That's the real victory, Rivera added. Not just stopping one criminal organization, but creating a model for preventing others from taking their place. Through the windows, they could see more vehicles arriving. Community leaders, business owners, law enforcement officials, all coming to learn from what happened at Riverside. The rest area had become a symbol of successful resistance against criminal intimidation. You know what really made the difference? And Torres mused. It wasn't just the arrests or the seized assets. It was showing people they don't have to live in fear. Every community they terrorized is standing up now, sharing information, working together. Maya brought updates from their expanding communication network. Other facilities are reporting suspicious activity, coordinating responses. The criminals can't hide anymore. Too many people watching, too many communities united against them. Because we proved something important, Harrison explained. Fear only works when people feel isolated. Once communities stand together, the intimidation loses its power. The gathering continued as more success stories emerged. Corrupt officials were being removed from power. Criminal networks were being exposed and dismantled. Communities that had lived under the shadow of organized crime were reclaiming their independence. Remember how it started? Sarah asked, watching the celebration. Just two Iron Serpents thinking they could intimidate a simple rest area. Harrison nodded. They made a common mistake. Thought fear was their strength, never realized it could unite people against them. Now their whole empire's gone, and something better's taking its place. The afternoon sun highlighted the changes at Riverside. New security systems, coordinated communication networks, and most importantly, a community that had found its strength. What had started as criminal intimidation had led to a transformation that would impact communities for years to come. The Justice Department's using our operation as a case study, Torres reported, teaching other agencies how community resistance can help take down organized crime. Your stand here didn't just stop criminals. It changed how we fight them. Rivera checked his phone, reading updates from his growing network of honest law enforcement. Got reports from up and down the coast. Communities are organizing, sharing information, standing together against intimidation. The days of criminals controlling these highways are over. Harrison watched as more people arrived to share in their victory. The Iron Serpents had thought they were targeting just another aging veteran at a quiet rest area. Instead, they'd sparked a movement that would continue long after their empire crumbled to dust. That's the real legacy, he said quietly. Not just defeating one organization, but showing people everywhere that fear only has the power we give it. When communities stand together, when people refuse to be intimidated, even the most powerful criminals can be brought down. The sun began to set on Riverside Rest Area, but its impact would be felt for generations. A simple stand against intimidation had transformed into something much more, a blueprint for communities everywhere to resist and defeat organized crime. As Harrison sat at his usual table, watching families and truckers mingle with law enforcement and federal agents, he knew the Iron Serpent's biggest mistake hadn't been targeting the wrong veteran. It had been threatening a community that refused to be broken, inspiring others to stand together against intimidation and crime. The war was over, but its legacy would live on in every community that chose to stand together, in every person who refused to live in fear, and in every victory over those who would use intimidation to control others. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.